Memorial Day, originally called Decoration Day when people would go decorate the headstones of their loved ones who fell while serving in the U.S. military. It is now a federal holiday observed on the last Monday of every May. Welcome to my COVID-19 Marathon number 9, where we will look back at some famous battles throughout history and honor the soldiers who fought and died so that we could have this world that we live in today. Despite being the time of COVID-19, it's still a pretty good world. 5-kilometer mark, and the first battle we're going to look back on took place on April 16th, 1457 BC, the Battle of Megiddo. Now, Megiddo was located just north of Jerusalem, and the Egyptian Empire was growing, and the Canaanites were beginning to rebel against the Egyptians. Megiddo was a very important location for the Egyptians because it controlled the Via Maris, the trade route that linked Egypt to Mesopotamia. So the Canaanite revolt threatened the Egyptian Empire. The battle lasted several months, killing 4,000 Egyptians and 8,300 Canaanites. The Egyptians finally won and their empire expanded. This battle was also the first time a composite bow was recorded for being used, and it was the first time a body count was recorded. And if you know your Bible, then you recognize the Canaanite peoples, and you recognize Megiddo or Har Megiddo or Harmageddon, where we get Armageddon, which is the location of the ultimate end of the world battle to end all battles, war that still has yet to be fought. 10-kilometer mark in the next battle, August 12th, 490 BC, the Battle of Marathon. Now, the Persian Empire had a strong hold on a rebellious Greece. It's a long, fascinating history of battles and revolts, but in 490 BC, the Persian army sailed to Greece to punish the Athenians for helping assist in the Ionian revolt years before. As the battle was going to take place in Greece, the Athenians got to choose where to face off against the invading Persians, and they chose the mountainous area of Marathon. About 11,000 Greeks faced off against 25,000 Persian infantry, 1,000 cavalry, and 600 triremes or battleships. Although the Greeks were severely outnumbered, they won the battle, losing only an estimated 1,000 people, while the Persians lost about 2 to 3 times as many, as well as a handful of triremes. This was the first major victory for the Greeks against the Greco-Persian Wars, and it showed to all of Greece that the Persians could be defeated and they did not have to stay subject to the Persian Empire. And it also showed to all Greeks that it could be done without the Spartans. And the Spartans, you know, from the movies, were the most badass soldiers of all Greece. But, you know, they were pissed off at the Athenians at the time, so they refused to help. But it was clear now that the divided Greeks could stand up against the Persians and win without the help of the Spartans, and that the Spartans were not the only badasses in town. And of course, with Greece being able to thrive on its own terms, they developed democracy and algebra and the catapult and lighthouses and 2 more things, the marathon and the shower. That's the 15K mark, and the next battle is October 10, 732, the Battle of Tours. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe descended into the Dark Ages, and around 700, the Visigoths, who were in modern-day Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, they weren't doing so well with famine and infighting and whatnot, and the people were not having it. So, rivals of the king, Roderick, reached out across the Strait of Gibraltar to the Umayyads, and which was part of the Islamic Empire, the Umayyad Caliphate, which is this part of the army, and they asked for help overthrowing their king. So, of course, what did the Muslims do? You know, seeing how weak the Visigoths were, they didn't just help overthrow the king. They invaded and took over the land for themselves. And now we have the Persians, the Muslims, the Umayyads. They have a foothold in Europe, and they are not stopping. So they march on north to the Franks in France. The Christian Franks They were not going to be invaded though. They were not going to have it. So on October 10th, 732, about 20,000 Franks faced off against 25,000 Arabs. And it was a decisive victory for the Franks. And the Umayyad army fled back south, back across the Strait of Gibraltar and out of Europe. And the Franks only lost about 1,000 soldiers that day, but they killed 12,000 Umayyads. Now, throughout the ages, the Arabic Muslims had always been knocking on the Christian Europeans' door, and this battle marked a turning point, and it is argued to this day that Western civilization was able to hold on to Christianity because of the Franks defeating the Umayyads in the Battle of Tours. Bus coming. All right, halfway done. Next up, May 29th, 1453, the Fall of Constantinople. East versus West, Islam versus Christianity. It's a long history of many battles and deaths. And the main door that divided East and West was Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. Now in the year 324, the ancient city of Byzantium became the new capital of the Roman Empire and was renamed Constantinople when Emperor Constantine conquered the city. And if you know your Christian history, then you know that Constantine converted the entire Roman Empire to Christianity after having a vision of the Cairo the night before the Battle of Milvian Bridge on October 28th, 312. And Cairo in Greek would be the first two letters of Christ. So it was interpreted as a sign from the Christian God that they would be victorious in battle. And this would be why, you know, during the Battle of Tours, why it was a Christian, Europe was a Christian and the Franks were Christian because of Constantine. So we got Byzantium, now Constantinople, and it's right there at the door, the door of East meets West. And Homeboy sets up the Christian capital right there. And he knows where he's at, so he builds walls and fortifies it to the max, and these walls are now called the Thessalonian walls. Now Constantinople has a long history of being attacked by everyone and anyone for over 1,000 years at this point. And generations of Arabs have tried to sack the city from using ramparts to scale the walls, to naval attacks, to even trying to dig under the walls. They've tried just about everything, but what finally allowed the Ottoman Empire, at this time as they were known, to sack the city was a new invention, the cannon. So after 1,000 years, on May 29th, 1453, the city finally fell and became what is now known as Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. It's impossible to know how many soldiers fought and died over the 1,000 years of battling, trying to take over this city. But what changed that day was that city walls went from being a major source of protection for a city to just a minor inconvenience to the attackers. City walls no longer served a purpose thanks to the cannon. .25-kilometer mark. All right, so now we're going to move over to the other side of the world, to the Americas, the American Revolution. September 1777, the Battles of Saratoga. Now we got the colonies versus England here, and the Saratoga battles were more of a campaign designed by the British to try and divide and conquer the colonies. They wanted to get control of the Hudson River, which runs, vertically up and down the eastern side of New York, and that would effectively divide the colonists in two. Now, fortunately, not many lives were lost in these battles, maybe less than 1,000 total for both sides combined. But what those who died, what they didn't know was the results of what they died for. On October 17th, 1777, for the first time, a British Army general surrendered to the colonies. Now, this was a turning point for not just the Revolutionary War, but for the world. See, as news reached Benjamin Franklin over in France, he was able to convince the French to join the colonies in their fight against the British. And with the help of the French, the American Revolution was won, and the United States of America was free. Consequently, when the French learned about the American Revolution victory, they decided it was time to revolt themselves, and with that, 1789, I believe, is the French Revolution, and they revolted against their king, and they established a constitution. And that was important because this was the birth of what is known as total war, meaning that everyone and everything is a target of the war. There's no such thing as just you're a soldier and you're a civilian. It's everything is part of the war. As a side note, I don't believe we do total war anymore. Now what we try to do is we try to only attack those that we're specifically fighting, which is why in the War on Terror, the terrorists would hide out in churches or in civilians' homes because they knew that we wouldn't go blow up a church or something like that, which made it much more difficult. But you know what? It's the right thing to do, or not do. Total war is bad. That's the 30-kilometer mark. All right, September 17th, 1862, the Battle of Antietam. I think that's how you pronounce it. About a year and a half into the American Civil War, over 87,000 Union soldiers faced off against 38,000 Confederate soldiers in Maryland, in what would become the bloodiest day in American U.S. military history. Now, despite having twice as many soldiers, Union General George B. McClellan just could not bring himself to beat Robert E. Lee's army, because he believed that the odds were reversed, and so therefore McClellan was very cautious and apprehensive and wouldn't just go in for the kill. 12,410 Union soldiers died that day, along with 10,316 Confederate soldiers. That's 22,217 Americans who died in one day. Now, even though this was not a decisive win for the North, seen as the South wound up retreating, President Lincoln seized the victorious moment and he announced the Emancipation Proclamation 5 days later, on September 22nd, 1862. The first major step in freeing the American slaves. Now, on top of all this, the British and the French were watching from across the Atlantic. And until that day, they believed that the Confederate Army was going to win and the United States would be split up into two countries. Now, if I wanted to claim my house as a new country, what it takes for that to be legitimate is for another sovereign nation to recognize and say, I am a sovereign nation. So when the United States declared their sovereign nation from British, it was Morocco who stepped up and recognized and said, yep, we recognize the United States as a free sovereign nation. In 1862, the British and the French were ready to recognize the Confederate States of America, the South, as its own sovereign nation, separate from the United States of America. But after the Battle of Antietam, the British and the French changed their minds. The United States remained one country. My feet are dragging. They might as well just be speed walking now instead of trying to run, but I'm trying. If someone's gonna go through the trouble of drawing up a hopscotch, I better do it, right? What is this? 30 35-kilometer mark. All right. June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord. Now, World War II, is probably the most studied and talked about war in all history. And you may not have heard of Operation Overlord, but it began with D-Day and storming the beaches of Normandy, France. I don't think I have to go into too much detail about it, but in short, it's the day that the US, Canadian, and British soldiers launched a full campaign to gain a foothold on the European continent that was fully controlled by the Nazis. It was a horrific scene, but also an operation full of preparation, deception, fear, lies, errors, and a lot of death. And if you don't know anything about it beyond what you saw in Saving Private Ryan, I urge you to look it up and read more about it. Now, what's remarkable about Operation Overlord is that it is estimated that only 25,000 to 39,000 people were killed in Operation Overlord. And I say only because in relation to the over 1 million people directly or indirectly involved in the operation, that's a pretty good low number. So in total, over 73 million people died in World War II. About 50 million of those were civilians. But I want to make a side note here that the word hero is thrown around a lot these days in the time of COVID-19, and the frontline workers, absolutely. But next time you throw around that word hero, I want you to think of that 19-year-old kid who got in a boat, sailed across the English Channel, jumped out of the boat and ran toward machine guns firing at him. And these were not machine guns like in the few past wars, like that about. I mean, these were badass German engineered machine guns firing 100 bullets per second. Now, how anybody survived getting off one of those beaches in Normandy is just astounding. But you want to talk about a hero, talk about a 19-year-old kid who hopped in a plane, flew across the world, jumped in a boat in early hours of the morning and landed on a beach and ran straight at a machine gun firing 100 bullets per second at him. That, holy cow, that is a hero. Now, I mentioned that in World War II, 50 million of the casualties were civilians, but let's talk about the soldiers too. At one time, every soldier was a civilian. And no matter what the battle, what the war, or what side they were on, those were young men who were people who stepped up and charged into battle. And I don't want to argue about why they did it, depending upon history. Some of them did it, because that was their job. They got paid, they needed to feed their family. Some of them did it because that was their lifestyle. And maybe some of them did it for fighting for their land, of what they believed in. And some of them were just straight up brainwashed, But no matter the reason, I would argue very few of these soldiers in any of these battles, or the numerous battles that I didn't even mention, fought because they simply felt like getting shot at today, or felt like they didn't feel like dying. But one thing is for sure, they all believed that they were on the right side. So on Memorial Day, the last Monday of every May, I like to think about all the lives that were lost in battles and wars that shaped the world that we currently live in. And I'm happy to say I really don't have much to complain about because of the men and women who gave up their lives to make my life what it is. So, think of your life and the world and society, and good or bad, it is what it is because people fought and gave up their lives for it. And I hope you think that your life and your world and your society is pretty good. I really do. It's the 25-mile mark, or 40 kilometers. And one last note about the Battle of Marathon. We talked about that at the beginning. For those who don't know the myth of Philippides, I'm going to tell you. And back in August of 490 BC, when news reached Athens that the Persians were coming, the citizens were obviously alarmed, right? Now, it took time to amass the Athenian army and get them to Marathon and wait for the Persians to get there and fight the battle. And during all this time, the citizens and the Athenian government were living in fear, awaiting the news of their fate. So, now, prior to the battle, a courier named Philippides was sent to Sparta to ask for help. And as there was no other mode of transportation at the time, dude ran. Dude ran 150 miles in 2 days and then ran back. He then ran 25 miles from Athens up to Marathon. And when the Greeks won the battle, dude ran 25 miles back to Athens to report the victory. And it is said that he collapsed there in front of the government, delivering the news of the victory and calming the people. And he died, but not before completing his mission. That's 26.3 miles and another one in the bucket. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if I got any history wrong, please let me know in the comments below. And I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day and have a good one. And think about all that your life is and how wonderful it is because of people who have died to make sure that it is. Thank you.